This is Redhawk, and I'm speaking to you from the deep end. You know, when I was in the 11th grade, I was sent to the counselor, when they plan for your future, for college and stuff. And I got there, and I was a troubled kid, a little bit juvenile delinquent. The counselor said, you just go sit out on the bench in the hallway because I don't see any future. So, of course, I walked home. I got home. My mom says, what are you doing? And I said, I got no future. What the hell? And so she says, what do you mean? I said, I went and saw my counselor. She said, to hell with that. She said, you sit there. She went up to the school. When she got back, I had a future.
Wow. That's
called hope. You see, I had already been dubbed as one of the hopeless ones. But what was it Emily Dickinson said? Hope is a thing with feathers that perches on the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in eternity it asked a crumb of me. Welcome to the deep end. Welcome to hope.
Hope springs eternal.
Amen, sister. Hope springs eternal. This hope thing is a tricky one. It's the studies that I'm going to be quoting from, and most of the material I'm going to use is coming from a book called Spiritual Evolution, and that is written by George Valent. And I'll be honest, whoever writes me first an email at redhawkthedeepend@gmail.com, I will send you a copy of this book. That's no lie. I will send you a copy of this book. I believe it is a seminal work, and it comes out of 35 years of research out of Harvard's school, the Department of Adult Development. And they've done a whole series of what are called functional MRIs, which are real-time 3D pictures of your brain, and they exposed people to different visual media and vocal medium, and that expressed and pulled out different emotions, and they found that hope is really a dance between the neocortex and the limbic system. And we human beings are the only ones who have it, and we have it in spades. Boy, do we have it in spades. And all the emotions and the ability to respond. Hope is a really good one because what it does is it is, as I said last week, it gives us a future. The faith really comes from the past, if you will. It grows out of it. Hope projects us into the future in a way that's quite amazing. It allows us to remember the future. I used the example last week of the farmer who continues to plant his seeds, and they grow and they have food, and it happens year after year, and one year they don't grow. But what they do have is hope because they remember the future. And what we're going to learn is that many times hope is learned. It's not like some of the other positive emotions. We can actually mess ourselves up by not teaching hope in the early years. And MaryAnn, you and I were having a conversation about this before the podcast.
Yeah.
And almost the responsibility of the village to make sure every child has the opportunity for hopeful thinking.
Yes. And hope also brings a quality to life that if you don't have hope, you're missing that quality.
Exactly. And we really don't, we can't, it's not a quantifiable thing, but it is a qualifiable thing that we can identify and see when it is in play and when it is not.
Right. Well, despair will drag you down, and without
Amen.
Hope, you will be lost in despair.
And despair is the opposite of hope in many of the studies that we're going to talk about. And the one that I quoted at our last podcast that I'll reiterate here is about the rats who were saved while swimming around. The rats who were saved when they were put versus the rats who weren't saved, that the rats who were saved can swim a third or almost twice as long as a rat that has not been saved.
Previously, right?
Previously,
Yes.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And the study was taken a bit further, and this is the one that blows my mind. And I'll be honest, all these rat studies, I got to work in an experimental lab. I didn't last too long because I couldn't handle what we were doing to the rats. So I'll just put that out front. However, God bless the rats because of what they have taught us. Out of the John Hopkins, a woman named Madeline Vizentainer reproduced the study of the rats, but upped it one more thing. And what they did is used electrical shocks. They had rats that could control the electrical shocks and those who could not. And they taught the rats who could not control the electrical shocks learned helplessness.
Which is a big topic for me.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's a big topic for a whole lot of people who we have been rendered helpless by the vicissitudes of reality.
Well, when you experience one hit right after another, and then they just keep coming, and you come to realize that there's not a whole lot in this world that you can control. And coming to that place of vulnerability, of being out of control, and yet being and trying to find hope within that that sphere. And learned helplessness is something that can really lead to depression and despair.
Yes. And the good news is that humans are not trapped by that there is
Right.
hope. We might lose our faith, but hope can restore it. And that's part of what we're going to talk about and how that process happens. But in the story of this learned helplessness, what they found out is they had these rats now who had been psychologically trained. And so this woman got this idea that she could inject cancer cells into a group of 30 rats that had experienced through their own efforts, successful escape from the shock versus those who could not escape the shock. And she injected just enough, and they had established this in previous studies, of cancer cells where 50% of the rats would get cancer and 50% wouldn't. Now here is the amazing thing. Here is the amazing thing. Eventually, instead of 50%, only 27% of the hopeful rats died of cancer. However, 63% of the hopeless rats died. Now, this is an amazing thing. They tried to transfer this experimental study into a clinical study in inner city through this study of adult development that came out of Harvard. And the survival of inner-city men controlling for IQ, parental social class, ethnicity, multi-problem family membership stuff, whether we're from a single parent or double parent, they controlled all those things, and they found those who had hope versus those who didn't. And they tracked those people, and they found that those who had hope lived longer. So you want to know the difference that hope makes? Sometimes it's between life and death. So be hopeful. Lose your faith as many times as you want, but have hope. You're making a face, MaryAnn.
Well, as you know, these kind of things challenge me a lot because I know a lot of people that had a lot of hope and a lot of kids. I've worked with families of kids with cancer for many years, and lots of hope, lots of prayers, and children still died. And so I get what this is saying, and I get that our attitude and really does make a difference, but it makes a difference in the quality of our life too.
Yes.
Not just in the longevity of our life.
And I think that's an important piece to keep in front. And we're going to talk a little bit about what hope is and is not. But I want us to lay a context, because hope is a contextual limbic response. It's not about wishing, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But what they've said is hope reflects the capacity for one's loving, lyrical, limbic memory of the past to become attached to a memory of the future. And they say that this capacity occurs within. It happens in a relationship with the limbic and the frontal lobes. This is why rats don't have, if you don't teach it, they'll never get it. But basically, this is the piece, they say, that most unambiguously separates Homo sapiens from other primates. Our capacity to anticipate, to mourn in advance, to plant seeds, and to plan for the future, these are all capacities based in our frontal lobes. Only an integrated brain, that's with the limbic and the frontal lobes, can hope that agriculture can really work, that seeds planted in bleak spring will bear fruit next autumn. You see, this is the difference that hope makes. It's not going to cure cancer. It's not going to do any of these things. So let's talk a little bit about what hope is not.
But it lives there in the face of all of those things.
It lives there. And it doesn't, hope doesn't mean you don't lose your faith.
Not necessarily. Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've lost my faith.
Well, hope is truth. It looks at things truthfully.
Amen.
Too.
And we're going to talk about that a little deeper when we get to what hope does, because we've already established one of the things that hope does. It imagines. It can imagine a future, and that future becomes a palpable reality. However, what hope is not a wish. Wishes are basically left brain things. They're made up of images and rooted. They're not made up of images. They're made up of words. The left brain, where hope is made up of images. And the right brain. And that's where hope basically is. It's a right brain thing. It's not something that's easy. Hope requires effort. And this really kind of bummed me out. As he says, hope reflects our ability to imagine a realistic, positive future. Hope is emotional, energizing, strengthening. Wishing is passive, cognitive, and potentially weakening. You attach yourselves to a left brain idea of the future. And, of course, that can create some real despair.
Well, and hope shifts as well.
That's right.
In the face of reality.
And, one of the things he's positing, and he's a psychiatrist, is without hope, we become depressed. And basically the depressed are hopeless. It's a hopelessness. And again, it relates back to helplessness. Mm-hmm. What is it that turns that around? And I'm going to suggest what is it that turns it around is the community. Because I'll be honest, when I've lost my faith, I didn't feel like I had any hope, but people around me still did. They saw something in me that was still active, I guess.
We carry each other, and
now we're back to the oneness, aren't we?
That's what community is all about, right?
Even though I only have my own little piece of the film, it's still a picture of the whole, and you're part of the whole. Therefore, who I am, you're a part of that. And the whole concept of despair is huge. This is huge. Another thing that hope is not is fantasy. And this is important because fantasy comes out of wishful thinking many times. The examples they give is of Robert Scott, who was starving to death in his tent in Antarctica. And he kept fantasizing about hot meals, but, that doesn't give you a hot meal. However, he wrote a letter to his wife. And he said, I think the last chance we have of survival is gone, and we've decided not to kill ourselves, but to fight to the last depot. Make the boy interested in natural history if you can. It is better than games, and they encourage it at some schools. When the letter was found, Peter Scott, his son, read it. And he became a brilliant painter of wildlife. You see, it goes on. Hope is not fantasy. Hope does not usually cure cancer, nor does it feed doomed explorers. Rather, hope lets a grandmother plant acorns that will someday shade their middle-aged grandchildren. Hope does not abolish grief. It only reminds us of the possibility that, as in winter garden, the seeds of love may successfully be resown. And I'm going to posit that that's really what it's about, is the seeds of love. And I'll be honest, MaryAnn, you're one of the most loving people I know. But you've also probably experienced more grief than I know, and maybe that's what my connection to you is that I'm empathic enough that I share the tragedy of your journey, and I also share the glory of your redemption in it, because you're pretty much alive, darling.
I try, but it's, and I wasn't kidding about the way that hope, that it does sustain you and it does shift. And I mean, there were times when I was accused of being in denial because I was still hoping in the face of medical facts, and that wasn't the case at all. I knew exactly what was happening, but I also knew that anything is possible, and I still believe that. And I also knew that hope can shift, and it can change. Hope isn't necessarily about a desired outcome. Hope is about a desired quality of life and a peace and a love, and there's so much more than just what you want. And I think that contrasts with the wishing. When you wish for something, you have a desired outcome. When you hope for something, you imagine outcomes. And then when one of them can no longer be imagined and no longer be held, you can shift that to a different outcome, and you can start to reimagine what that future could look like, and still hold love and joy within despair and sorrow. And so that's
wow. As you were talking, I was thinking hope is its own seed. Mm-hmm. It's a kernel deep in the soul that once planted, and maybe it didn't get planted in the first years of life. Maybe the community brought you into it later.
Oh, absolutely.
Like the story of love and the child who killed another child, and then the mother of the murdered child adopted the...
Well, have you ever seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life?
Oh my gosh, how many times?
Okay, I have lived that final scene where Jimmy Stewart stands in his living room and the community comes in and lifts him up and carries him on. And I have had the privilege of being able to live that, to be lifted up by the community. And that's where my hope comes from.
Amen.
It comes from others who lifted us up.
And that can, they say they found kernels of wheat that were 3,000 years old in the tombs of pharaohs, and they planted them and they grew.
Wow.
And I think, wow, maybe that's what hope is. It's even in that dark place where it's all gone and it's all despair, that dark night of the soul place, even there, that kernel is there, and the community around us is wet and ready. It's fertile ground.
To grow, right?
Yeah, and that's why community is so important. Yeah. And, back to the oneness of being.
Well, it's isolation and it's separation that makes us feel terrible, horrible. I've been there.
and it does.
Yeah. And because you feel afflicted when these horrible things are happening.
And there is the paradox, because suffering equals hope destroyed, and suffering is more than pain. It is loss of control. It is despair. It is the loss of hope. And if the loss of hope transforms pain into suffering, the return of hope transforms suffering back again into manageable pain.
Yeah.
Damn it.
No, great.
But the paradox is that one's hope can only equal their level of suffering.
Well,
I'm sorry.
I used to think,
sucks.
But that's so funny, because I used to think of spectrum, and off to the left is your sorrow, and off to the right is your hope and your joy. And you're right, they are equal. And as your sorrow and despair grows, so you have the capacity to grow on the other side.
Yes.
But you don't always take it.
And now we're talking about the breadth and depth of being.
Right.
That these are about the breadth of being. That people want to live, I think one of the things I love Matthew Fox said, he says, we tried to do in the 20th century to pain what they tried to do to sex in the 19th century, which was try to cover it up, thinking it's we don't have to talk about it or anything, that it's, we did with pain. We thought, we can do without pain. I'm pushing 70 here, and I want to tell you, it'd be great to do without pain, but I don't think I'd be as wise.
Well, and we're trying to medicate it away now, too.
Yes.
And you're right. Wisdom does come from that. And, the age-old problem of evil, why does suffering exist?
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer to that, but I know that it can be a catalyst for great joy.
Yes. And, for me, over and over, I say the point of suffering is to put an end to it.
Yes.
And that's why we're dealing with the positive emotions, because this is how we connect with each other. This is how we let each other in. And not only let each other in, but once we've done that, we're allowed to grow and expand. We ourselves become semi-permeable, if you will. And that's, how do we do that in a way that's truly facilitating to ourselves and the community's health? Another final thing I want to say that hope is not is cognitivity. In other words, it's not a head trip. And Erik Erikson really says that the virtue of hope at the beginning of life is the most indispensable virtue there is. And we've talked about this the first 5 years. Wow. You talk about shaping a being. The good news of being a human is even a hopeless human without faith can find hope from the community around them. And we're going to get into some more of that when we get to love in a few podcasts from now, which is, where I think MaryAnn and I both try to live in that love place, because that's the vortex of it all, I think.
That's where it's happening, man.
That's where it's happening. But I want us to also understand what hope does. Hope does. What it does is it imagines. And we've talked about that. It's imagining futures, and not just a single future, but many futures. Yes. I think of the Dust Bowl in the 30s and all those farmers, who hoped for a crop, but it wasn't coming. So what did their imaginations have to do? Go watch Grapes of Wrath, man. It's an amazing story. We had to reimagine who we were as a people. And if you don't think that's happening right now on our planet, if you don't think that's happening right now in America, the biggest argument is over who we are as we the people. Right now, the latest poll shows that only 25% of those who call themselves Republicans believe a democracy is important for their way of life. We are literally reimagining who we are that will bear our grandchildren. This is a volatile time, and what all of you think, say, and do, where your feet take you and what your checkbook says, that's going to determine who we become.
Well, and it's tempting to go to helplessness, and we have to hope. We have to imagine the future that we want to see, and not give in to forces that may or may not be within our control.
That's right. And so one of the things that my generation has really learned to do well, we've not learned to do a whole lot well, but what we have learned to do is translate what's going on outside of us into the limbic system, and it's called music. And I don't have any music for you to play today, but I want you to think about where the hopeful songs are. Lord of the Dance, so many hymns are full of hope. So many of them are full of a bunch of despair too, regretfully. But look at our music.
Listen to country.
Yeah, look at our music. Look at the '60s music and how it continues to go on and on. Look at how the Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. Look at the catalog of the Beatles, how it was the soundtrack for a whole generation seeking to come to a new awareness of global understanding. And we're the first generation to do that. Every bit of my high school education, every globe I looked at had geopolitical boundaries on it until 1968, when we got that first picture of the Earthrise, and all of a sudden we began seeing the Earth without the geopolitical boundaries. We began to see that, wait a minute, it's not a divided up thing.
It's one.
It's one. It's not political boundaries, it's eco boundaries, and there are none. If you want to find the eco boundary, it's our atmosphere. That's where it is.
Yeah.
So this hope piece is huge, and I suggest that we continue going to our music. We continue going to those things that arouse us at the most basic level of our emotions. And keep in mind when fear creeps in, when hate creeps in. And that's not to say that your fear and hate can't be used. Fear, hate, and grief, they're the three big negatives, and I want to say they can destroy us or they can help save us.
Well, I can tell you from personal experience that grief has an energy that can be life-changing for other people around you.
Yes.
Yeah. You can channel.
One of the things that I've learned that my grandmother said over and over, and then my mother said, and it's like I'd roll my eyes, hey, Ma, come over off all those damn imperatives. But it was basically, this too shall pass.
Yeah. And
if it doesn't, it'll probably be me that passes. And then whether that's relevant or not, that's for a whole metaphysical thing to decide. But I want us to get, one of the things about this music, and I think it's important.
Yeah.
Paul McCartney in 1969 had this unbelievable dream about his mother, Mary, who died long before. And I think he was 14 when she died. But he had this dream, and he felt it so much that when he woke from the dream, he wrote these immortal lines. And when the night is cloudy, there is still a light that shines on me. Shine until tomorrow. Let it be. Let it be.
Yeah. Music touches places that words can't.
It's a call. It's a call to the deeper place where we are all joined together. You have any final comments, MaryAnn?
Yeah, it's the whole music thing. I was just talking with a music therapist yesterday, and it's amazing the healing effects of music on children who have disabilities or children who have. They're finding that music can change their lives, give them the ability to communicate where they didn't have that before. So that's my final thought.
Well, and we're gonna keep music to the front of our brains because although my dog really looked like she was dancing for a long time, I don't think she was. So here's my final thought. All right, there is a point for all of us where it's no longer about belief in God. It's about the experience of the presence of God, the experience of this movement that is embedded in the universe, and this movement through time, and our recognizing the intent and impetus here in this moment, both within us and without, and then seeking to align ourselves with this very moving presence of God, this moving holy oneness of being, of life, and of consciousness. How do we move? How do we connect? All of these things are part of the package that we're trying to address here at the Deep End. We really hope that you've enjoyed our shows. Next week, we're going to go somewhere that, to me, is at the crux of the whole human experience. Forgiveness. Forgiveness. We hope you'll join us, and we hope that all of you will experience this oneness of being, God's peace, here from the Deep End.